I spent the last week or so immersed in Brene Brown materials, and I feel like I've gotten to know her. You really should look her up if you haven't heard of her. She describes herself as a social researcher. Brown is known in particular for her work on shame, vulnerability, leadership, and for her widely viewed TED Talks. In her book, Daring Greatly, How the Courage to be Vulnerable Transforms the Way We Live, Love, Parent, and Lead, she writes, "Vulnerability sounds like truth and feels like courage. Truth and courage aren't always comfortable, but they're never weakness." The chalice lighting also comes from the same book. Vulnerability is the birthplace of love, belonging, joy, courage, empathy, and creativity. It is the source of hope, empathy, accountability, and authenticity. If we want a greater clarity in our purpose or deeper and more meaningful spiritual lives, vulnerability is the path. So what does this mean for us? Even if you recognize the value of vulnerability, how do we practice it? What does it look like? And how in the world does it tie into my sermon, Grace and Peace? Grace and peace was a common greeting in early Christianity, especially in the letters of the Apostle Paul. Grace was given freely as a gift from God, an unmerited blessing we could neither earn nor deserve. Said another way, grace is like the love that will not let us go, regardless of our shortcomings or character defects. Peace was the other half of the greeting. And to a Jew, peace is a loaded word, shalom. It is greater than the Pax Romana of the day and greater than a simple wish for comfort. It indicates an inward sense of completeness and wholeness. May you be whole. May you be complete. May everything be as it should be. Grace freely given and peace unto you. You see, on the path of vulnerability, Brene Brown says this: it's the first thing we look for in others and the last thing we want others to see. So to offer grace and peace invites others to be vulnerable and sets up a brave space for relationship to form. When someone shares openly about their life and you listen deeply, vulnerability is a gift and the glue that holds connection together. Brene Brown defines vulnerability as the emotion that we experience during times of uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. But it's really interesting. She said that before one of her lecturers, the ASL interpreters approached her to ask if there were any special words that she would be using a lot. She said that vulnerability would be used a lot. And that wasn't, and they showed her a sign. They showed her a sign of someone feeling weak in the knees. And she said that wasn't quite it. That wasn't what she was looking for. Was there any other sign for vulnerability? They said there was one other sign. An opening of the heart. The doors of the heart opening up gracefully. That was the sign she wanted to use for vulnerability. A graceful opening of the heart to let it guide connection. To be vulnerable means you show up to be seen with no guarantees. It is quite possibly one of the greatest measures of courage. Courage meaning with one's whole heart. Our connection with other people is only as solid and deep as our connection with ourselves. So how do we cultivate meaningful connection with ourselves and each other? This time last year, I found myself in crisis. I needed help. I sought residential treatment for mental health and addiction. I was afraid, ashamed, and deeply vulnerable. I would be asked to tell my story hundreds of times over the following 3 months. And I began to reconnect with myself and my heart as I connected with others and listened to their stories as well. When I finished treatment and returned home, I decided to be vulnerable and share with the congregation via email that I had gone away to get help for myself and that I was deeply grateful for the support during my time away. It seemed to me that the time for venerable clergy had passed and the time for vulnerable clergy had come. If I ever had a chance of connecting with you on a personal level, I had to be vulnerable and share about my imperfect life. The response I received filled my heart with love and connection as folks shared their stories of recovery. Brene Brown writes that recognizing and leaning into the discomfort of vulnerability teaches us how to live with joy, gratitude, and grace. I am so grateful that I opened my heart in this way and took the risk of being vulnerable with you. It has strengthened me beyond measure, and it is still teaching me how to live with joy, gratitude, and grace. Brown also insists that emotion is our biology, is our biography, our behavior, and our backstory. Biology, biography, behavior, and backstory. Emotion is all of that. And vulnerability is one of the most powerful emotions. It can guide us through the processing of events, teach us about ourselves and our histories. It can foster connection between people. But remember, this is our emotional work. We often believe that we need to learn to read emotions in others, but that's a myth. We can't do that accurately. We can only learn to read the emotions in ourselves, expand our emotional vocabulary, and gently invite the vulnerable sharing of emotions from others. Brene Brown defines connection as the energy that exists between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued, when they can give and receive without judgment, and when they derive sustenance and strength from the relationship. She writes, owning our story can be hard, but not nearly as difficult as spending our lives running from it. Embracing our vulnerabilities is risky, but not nearly as dangerous as giving up on love and belonging and joy, the experiences that make us the most vulnerable. Only when we are brave enough to explore the darkness will we discover the infinite power of our light. So I invite you to go now in peace and grace, to explore together, to connect, to be vulnerable, to embrace the risk of being loved, and take the chance to belong. Grace and peace to each of you. And amen.